spiritual food for thought. So if you caught my last video, which was pretty much posing the question, are we Christian Americans or are we American Christians? It laid a foundation for other videos like this one. So this one's going to be about debt bondage. And part of what I find is that a lot of what God has revealed in the Old Testament, and he declared it to be true, we can say that only applies to the nation of Israel, but there's so much there that he calls people to do that would fit into a category where it seems like it would actually be for anyone who sought to live his ways and sought to be wise. One example would simply be debt. But when he says, here's the blessings, here's the curses, there's certain curses there that nobody would ever want regardless of who it was pointed at. And there's certain blessings there that people would always want. And I think that some of what's revealed in Scripture is simply the Father taking his time to have us as his children understand the proper way to walk through this life, especially in the midst of a fallen and cursed earth, and especially if we want to have a good relationship with him. And many people, I believe, by rejecting things that he has said and discrediting them and saying, no, this is for somebody else or something like that, they throw away a lot of blessings, I think, that could be in their life, and a lot of things that could make their life a lot easier, a lot more intelligent, a lot more intentional, and to really reap what you sow, they toss in the garbage can. And they say it's for somebody else. So if you head through Deuteronomy, starting at chapter 27, verse 11, heading all the way through 28, there is these whole blessing and curses thing. Okay, I know the context, I know who he's talking to, and what he says, but let's consider for a moment. He says in Deuteronomy chapter 28, starting at verse 12, and we're going to do 13 as well, "The Lord shall open unto thee his good treasure, the heaven to give the rain upon thy land in his season, and to bless all the work of thine hand." Here's the part I want you to focus on. "And thou shalt lend unto many nations, and thou shalt not borrow. And the Lord shall make thee the head, and not the tail, and thou shalt be only above, and thou shalt not be beneath, if that thou hearken unto the commandments of the Lord thy God, which I command thee this day, to observe and to do them." So this whole part, he says, I'm going to make you the head, I'm not going to make you the tail. He says you're going to lend. You're going to be so blessed you'll be able to lend, and you won't borrow. If I think about Americans these days, and this may be true in your country as well, people choose to go into debt bondage. It's not something that often is forced upon them. They want something quick and now. It's like a fast food mentality. If I eat fast food all my life, maybe it's quick, maybe it's easy, maybe it's cheap, but I'm going to pay for it in the end. And a lot of times, people may want a car these days. They can buy a car for what they would, spend for one car payment. But instead they sign up for years and years of car payments to get some other car, some flashy car, some more expensive car. They don't need it, but they sign up for this debt bondage. Same thing with their houses. Okay? They sign up for 30-year mortgages, and they pay a lot more for something that's worth a lot less by the time they're done. Same thing with their educations. They desire some education, and we can get into this one a lot more deeper too, but it's an education that they cannot afford, which there may be many reasons why it may not be even a good idea, and they take on student loan debt for years and years to come. I know plenty of people in their 30s and 40s who are still crushed by a student loan debt. So why aren't they telling people in their teens and 20s, maybe don't do it? I don't know. I'm one of the people who would say, consider what you're doing. Consider what you're doing. So unfortunately, what we find these days is that debt bondage is often a choice. And unfortunately, I think it's the choice that we should not make. I'm just going to use a couple simple scriptures. Okay, we're going to do one more from the Old Testament, which is the book of Proverbs. A lot of people think a lot of that would still apply kind of across the board. And then a couple from the New Testament. But in Proverbs chapter 22, we read something very interesting. And I think that this is as true today as it was when it was written. So in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7. Says, "The rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender." So it's the second half of that verse. The borrower is servant to the lender. Consider that for a moment. In the Hebrew word there that's translated, servant in the King James Version, it means slave. It says the borrower is slave to the lender. Now, we can try to write this off and put it in whatever Old Testament category we want. We can try to say this is just something Solomon said. Or is this the wisdom of God saying, look, there's a certain way that things work. When you choose to be indebted to somebody, you actually become their slave, and they are your master. Let's think about that for a moment. I think as believers, we should only have one master, correct or no? I think that is correct. So what happens is people choose to put themselves in debt. Why? Because it's common. Because it's what Americans do. Because so many people out there, they don't own their houses, they don't own their clothes, they don't own the food in the fridge, it's all on the credit card, right? They don't own their educations, they don't own their cars, they don't own anything. But it's the American way. Well, what they don't realize is that they're signing up for many years of heavy bondage. They have this yoke upon their shoulders financially that will crush them in a lot of cases. A lot of the problems that people face in their marriages relate back to what? Money. And why does it relate back to money? Because of debt. So marriages, even in Christian homes, are being destroyed because people have forsaken something as simple as don't be in debt. Don't let somebody else be your master. The borrower is slave to the lender. Don't be a slave. Okay? That sounds interesting, but what happens when we get to 2 Corinthians? I've got two here from Corinthians. One's in 1st, one's in 2nd. So we're going to make this in a New Testament context as well, but I think that there's a lot of things the whole Bible through that paint one picture. And we'll actually start off in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 23. It says, "Ye are bought with a price. Be not the servants of men." Now we know that Christ came to serve. We know that we can serve others, but this is talking about being a slave of somebody else. It says, "Ye were bought with a price." Do you remember what that price was? Do you remember how the Messiah was crushed and bruised and broken and tormented and tortured and slaughtered just so that you could be reconciled to your Creator because you chose to sin against Him? Yeah, that's when He bought you. Okay, I believe in a certain thing that the Creator made me. And if I make something out of my own material, whose is it? It would be mine. So since He made me out of His own material, I should be His. But because I chose to rebel against Him, He had to redeem me with the blood of His Son. Redeem means to purchase, to buy. Therefore, if you walk into a store and you purchase something, you redeem something, it doesn't matter who made it. It doesn't matter where it came from. You paid the price. Therefore, it is yours regardless of its origin. So at this point, He made me and He bought me with the precious blood of His Son. I should be His. So since I was bought with a price, I should not be the slave of any man. And as we continue to 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, just the first part of this. And we'll hear this all the time in Christian churches, but they never apply it outside of certain realms. It says, "Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? What communion hath light with darkness? So be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers." Do you know what a yoke is? If a yoke is across two oxen, it's level because they're both oxen. Now, we could say that if one's a believer and one's a non-believer and you go into business deal with somebody, and maybe they're a secular, mechanic and you're a believing mechanic and you guys form a business together, that there's a yoke, okay? We could say that's unequally yoked because one's a believer, one's not, and that's how people apply it in marriage. But how about when the believer chooses to be the slave of the other person? The one who's lending. When the borrower chooses to become the slave of the lender, that makes it very unequal. You've put a yoke. There's something joining you two together, but you chose to come under their authority. You chose to sign up with your life, with your time, with a lot of your resources to owe that person. And if we think about it too, what do people normally go into bondage with? Debt bondage. It's a bank. So is a bank a believer? I mean, you wouldn't marry a non-believer, but you're going to choose to sign up for 30 years of debt bondage where you're somebody's slave for the next 30 years and you're going to pay them a whole lot extra. So you're going to have less time for your family because you're going to be needing to make more extra money to pay somebody just debt because you want it now. Guys, this is, I think, where we get far, far off track. The only debt that my wife and I had, okay, when I was like 25, 27, wanted to get married, I had no credit. Okay, there's Christian, financial experts is what they call themselves. You know how you make a Christian financial expert? Two ways. One, you call yourself a Christian financial expert. Two, you get somebody else to call you one. That's about it. Okay, but there's these Christian financial experts who talk about, good debt and things like that. It doesn't exist. Your credit score doesn't matter. It's who you are in Him that matters. Anyway, I didn't have anything at 27, so my dad had to co-sign for me to get a loan for $1,000. Why was I getting a loan for $1,000? To start building credit. Okay? I paid that off, and automatically I was approved for $5,000, so I took out a $4,000 loan, again, for nothing, just to do it. And I paid that off, and immediately I was approved for like $80,000 to $100,000. I could get a house loan at that point. So I got a house loan. Probably $65,000 to $70,000 is what I took out for the house. And at the time we realized what God said about these things, we said, well, this is the only debt we had. Any car we had, we just bought, and if it broke, we just bought a new one. They're much cheaper that way than if you sign up for, many long years of car payments. And we decided, you know what? Okay, then I guess we sell the house. So we sold our house. We took the equity that we had in the house, and we decided to take a trip. We bought some land outright, and then we waited on the Lord, knowing that we could walk into any bank and get a loan, knowing that we could do all sorts of things. They still send me all sorts of credit card things because of the credit card score I earned, playing their little game, buying it is essentially what I did. But we chose to wait on the Lord. So now we're sitting in a house that we own debt-free. Now we're sitting on property that we actually own. There is another way, and it's God's way. It's a blessing to be able to do things like that. I don't have to pay rent or a car payment or a mortgage or, rent my property, anything. But I chose, what? He told me I'm not to be unequally yoked together with non-believers. He told me that the borrower is slave to the lender. He told me that He bought me with a price, and I shouldn't be the slave of any man. Therefore I said, well, if this is your call for me, then I will obey you. Okay? He's the one who said, look, these are blessings over here. These are curses. Choose. Choose which one you want. Consider that, guys. I don't know what situation you're in. I don't know what your finances look like, but a lot of it is we reap what we sow. A lot of it is we choose to get things quick and easy, and we'll pay a lot more for it in the end, and guess what? We do pay a lot more for it. Some people pay with their marriages. Some people pay with the lives of their children. Okay, not that their children died because of it, but because they don't know their children. They don't have any time left. They've got to go back to the office. They've got to work late. They've got to work weekends. They've got to do things to live a certain life that is far more American than it is Christian. And I don't care how common it is, we're called to be a peculiar people in this earth. We're just passing through. He's given us a lot of His wisdom. And if we think we got it all together on our own, or that we don't need to check with Him before we do things, I think we're horribly, horribly mistaken. So again, yes, this gets heavy. This is serious issues. Yes, people suffer, and their lives are ruined because of things like this. People commit suicide. Their families fall apart. All sorts of things happen because of debt bondage. And God says, don't. Don't be their tail. Don't be their slave. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.